Well, my name's John Bone. I run the module using Mathematics in Economics, which all first year students in economics take at York. I was going to say something about the module. I will say something about the module, but I thought I'd start by saying something about why mathematics is important in economics. And I think there are a couple of reasons. The most obvious one, I suppose, is that in economics we study things which are measurable, more so than any other social science probably. The things we look at are immediately measurable. I'm thinking of prices, output, interest rates, unemployment, exchange rates. We're bombarded with numerical data on these things every day in the media. And some mathematical knowledge is important just to understand these numbers and how they work. So, for example, take GDP. Gross domestic product is the measure of the value of goods and services produced in an economy over any given period, normally a year. And historically, GDP tends to grow. It doesn't always grow. In periods of recession in the UK, for example, from one year to the next, GDP might fall, as we've seen. But over longer periods of time, it tends to grow. Okay, so suppose that GDP over a 10-year period grows by 25%. So in the last year of that period it's 25% or a quarter higher than it had been in the first year. And one obvious question is, well, what's the average annual rate of growth over that period? It won't have been growing smoothly over that period, but on average, what's it been growing at per year? And it takes a little bit of mathematical knowledge to realise that the answer isn't 25% divided by 10. It's not 2.5%. In fact, it's somewhat less than 2.5%. And it takes a little bit more mathematical knowledge to know how to work out exactly what it is. And it turns out to be just a nudge over 2.25%. And it takes a little bit more mathematical knowledge still to be able to work out that rate of growth, the period of time needed for GDP to double, is 31 years. So all of these things are fairly basic ideas to do with how GDP is behaving, but to do these calculations requires a bit of mathematical knowledge, in this case knowledge of how exponents work and logarithms. So this is one reason why maths is important in economics, because the things we're studying are numerically measurable and we just need a good sense of how numbers work. But I think there's a more fundamental reason why maths is important in economics, and that's really to do with the way economists try and understand how the world works. For example, what is it that determines GDP at any point in time? And the way the economists do this typically is by constructing models. And what's meant by a model is an artificial world, an artificial simplified world intended to try and capture some aspects of the real world, the aspects that you want to study. Okay? And you construct this world and you hope that by studying it and understanding how the model works, you hope you're getting some understanding of how the real world works. Well, there's many ways in which you can construct and analyse models. Okay? The most familiar probably is diagrams. You can draw a diagram. Your model is a diagram and you can push the diagram around and see how the model works. But this has limitations, most obviously because diagrams, it's hard to draw a diagram in more than 2 dimensions. Well, you can't draw a diagram in more than 2 dimensions, but it's hard to represent more than 2 dimensions in a diagram, so that has limitations. You could try and construct and study a model entirely verbally, using just words to describe and analyse your model. But words are slippery things, imprecise, ambiguous, you're not quite sure whether you're drawing the right conclusions at any time. You could, some people have done this, build physical models. There's a very famous example of a hydraulic machine built by Bill Phillips immediately after the Second World War. And this is a really nice machine, and you can find out lots about it on the internet if you're interested. This is a big hydraulic machine with coloured water, tanks, taps, pipes, pumps, and it's intended to represent GDP determination on basic Keynesian principles. But, you know, this is a cumbersome thing, difficult to build, has entertainment value maybe, not the ideal way of building a model. By far the most powerful, flexible and precise way of building and analysing models is to build your model as a set of equations and to analyse it mathematically. Anything you can do with physical, diagrammatic or verbal models you can do with mathematics and with some extra precision, and this is the real reason, the real fundamental reason why maths is important in economics. It helps economists build and understand models and hopefully therefore understand something about the real world. Okay, as to the module itself, using mathematics in economics, what we try and do is to introduce and look at some ways in which maths is used in economics in these kinds of ways. And we sequence the material in a way which makes sense mathematically. So we start with relatively simple maths that should be familiar to anyone who's got a good grade GCSE or equivalent. So I'm thinking of things like functions, simultaneous equations, exponents, things like that. And then we build mathematically on that to make sure everyone's got a good grasp of the kind of maths we're going to be using, but all the time along the way looking at economic applications, how this particular kind of maths is used in economics. And along the way we'll be looking at mathematical ideas and techniques that are new, even for people that have got a strong mathematics background. And I'm thinking in particular of material we look at right at the end of the module, which is the mathematics called constraint optimization. So yeah, the structure of the module in terms of contact hours, lectures, classes. Well, the module is split into 4 blocks, and each block has either 2 or 3 topics in it, and for each topic we have 2 lectures followed by a practical session where students go away, do some exercises, bring them along to the practical session, and then I'll work through the exercises in the practical session. And at the end of each block, well, 2 things happen. First of all, there's what we call a formative assessment. There's a kind of mock exam, if you like, on the material in that block. Students go away and do an exam, the format of which is exactly the same as the exam they'll do at the end of the module. And they do that in their own time, hand it in, it gets marked, and then there's a seminar, small group seminar, 12, 15 students, and the purpose of that seminar is to go over the exam and in that way go over the material in that block. So we repeat that block by block, and then we go through the year, 4 blocks, and then at the end of the year there's a revision session followed by the exam. So that's the structure of the module.